I've heard it said a million times that right before a person dies, he will see his whole life pass before him. On the day that I almost died, there were no visions of all the happy times I've had in life, no time for regrets or goodbyes. I saw no angels or bright tunnels. All I saw was death, and my greatest fear 5 inches from my face. It was an unusually humid summer morning in July of last year. My brother Scott had been convalescing with my family for a few days. He was 2 weeks along from having open heart surgery. That morning, my husband, son, and I were taking him from Fort Collins back to his home in Littleton. I was the driver. Scott sat up front with me. My son and husband sat in back. We were having a passionate discussion on the topic of war as we flew down I-25. I remember thinking that maybe I should change the subject since my brother was starting to get a little too uptight about the issue. Now, I think of myself as a pretty good driver. I've been driving for 35 years after all, and I have that big picture mentality. Always looking ahead or around me, always trying to anticipate the other drivers, always asking myself, what would I do if the person in front of me spun out of control? Or what would I do if one of my tires blew out right at this moment? I really do consider myself a defensive driver. And yet, despite all that experience, there was absolutely nothing that could have prepared me for what happened that morning. You see, as we flew down the highway in deep discussion, a spider, roughly the size of a 50-cent piece with a giant egg sac attached, crawled across my visor and began to descend her silky thread towards my lap. The conversation was cut short by a scream so loud, so desperate that it almost sent my poor brother into cardiac arrest. And even the spider stopped, right in front of my face. As I screamed, I also began to press harder on the gas. Suddenly, there were no other cars on the road, nobody else in the car with me. I was utterly alone with my greatest fear, Miss Mama Spider, Charlotte, Rosie, a hug, and I was Little Miss Muffet. My husband, who couldn't see the spider, calmly asked,
"Dear, what's wrong?"
My brother reached across to swat at the spider with his big sausage hands. I continued screaming, accelerating the car forward at 90 miles per hour without looking ahead. My greatest fear in that moment wasn't crashing the car, but rather that if we did crash, the spider would land on me. When my husband finally figured out what was happening, he said again in a very calm voice,
"Dear, you need to slow down and pull over."
After repeating himself several times, his words broke through to my scrambled brain. I took the next off-ramp, going 80 miles per hour. The spider rushed up her web in fear of my screams and hid behind the visor. This, of course, did not help since a hiding spider is even more terrifying. Before the car even came to a complete stop on the off-ramp, I was out the door screaming and shaking. Now I know that when someone dies in a car accident for no apparent reason, they just suddenly swerved off a 2-lane road or careened off a high mountain pass, it was most likely because of a spider. I saw a meme once that said, "Don't worry, the spider is smaller than you." Yeah, so is a grenade. I recently saw a news report in which a woman jumped out of a moving car because a spider had landed on her shoulder. The kicker is that her 9-year-old daughter was still inside the car, and the car ran into a passing school bus. The newscasters were in disbelief that a mother would do that. Well, I'm here to tell you that yes, she would. And yes, she probably needs a lifetime of therapy, just as I now know that I do.